Alright, I am in a situation in which I am moving things around in my home lab, my home server environment, and one of the things that I'm doing is rebuilding my Proxmox server on this little NAS here. And I thought, instead of just doing it on my own willy-nilly, I would do a full, complete walkthrough of the setup, how I'm going to do everything on this little server. So hopefully you learned something, you maybe follow along. This is going to be a complete walkthrough of installing Proxmox on a NAS, setting up storage pools within Proxmox, setting up a Ubuntu container with Cockpit to actually create shares so you can access the storage pool throughout your entire network. And then from there, we're going to be setting up my ultimate media server setup with Docker, all the R applications, and of course, an actual way to stream that media, whether that be Plex, Jellyfin, so on and so forth. We definitely got a lot to do, so let's get right on into it right after we thank the sponsor of today's video. Twingate, my primary solution to connecting to my home server remotely. Twingate is a zero trust VPN alternative that gives you a full dashboard to manage all your resources, users, and more. Later on in this series, when we set up Nginx Reverse Proxy Manager, we'll also be setting up Twingate so I could show you how all that works. It's really easy. You just spin up a connector either directly on Linux with a systemctl service or through a Docker container. Then all you do is use their client on any type of machine, whether that be Windows, Linux, Mac. You connect to your home network and then you can access anything that you share, whether that be direct terminals. You can share specific ports for an IP address or all the ports for whatever local IP address. It is a super cool service, super easy to set up, and it is completely free for up to 5 users. So make sure you go ahead and check the link down below to learn more. So one thing I need to touch on, especially if you're doing this from scratch, is hardware. This is a little Ugreen NAS. It's a pretty decent machine, but you don't need to use a pre-built device like this. You can build your own fairly easily and fairly cheaply. At a minimum for a setup like this, I would recommend at least 1 NVMe drive and 2 hard drives, so then you can set up those hard drives in a pool, mirror them, so if one fails, you can replace it. Life is good, you don't lose any data. For this specific setup, I have 3 NVMe drives. One is going to be the main NVMe that we install Proxmox on. I have 2 additional 1 terabyte NVMEs that I'm going to create in kind of a mirror thing, or a mirror pool. So there'll be 2 1 terabyte drives working together as a single 1 terabyte pool. That terabyte pool is going to be mostly for the disks for containers and virtual machines, while the 4 hard drives I have in here is going to be in a configuration similar to RAID 5, so if one of the 4 drives, I could switch it out and I don't lose any data. And that's going to be my shares, so that's where I'm going to store all my media, downloads, backups, things like that. If you do decide to build this on your own, or you want to use a computer you have or purchase a computer used, do make sure it has enough SATA ports that will support the configuration you're trying to go for, as well as enough NVMe slots. Again, I do recommend Intel if you're going to be using it as a streaming device, but if you're able to throw like NVIDIA GPU or something like that in there, you're going to be fine. If you do have the right media formats, chances are you'll barely even ever need to use hardware transcoding. So that was the hardware overview. The software that we're going to be using is Proxmox. Now this is a NAS technically, and I've recently discovered how to really utilize Proxmox well as a NAS operating system. I have an older video showing you how to directly pass through individual hard drives to a virtual machine that's running something like TrueNAS, but that I found is not really the best method to go about this. Our combination of Proxmox with their kind of storage pool system and Cockpit is going to be the way to go. If you don't know, Proxmox is a fantastic virtualization platform for both containers, kind of similar to Docker, and full-on actual virtual machines. And just the GUI is amazing for managing networking, all your different storage, and even other devices such as the quick sync on this Intel, or anything else you want to plug into it. Cockpit over here is a really nice GUI for just a plain Ubuntu system. Later on, we're going to create a container for Ubuntu, which is going to be specifically for managing our shares, and we're going to do that with Cockpit, as well as a couple extensions for Cockpit that you can see here. So rambling aside, let's go ahead and actually get on into the guide, and we're first going to want to install Proxmox on this machine. I've already flashed it to a USB drive here. You just download the ISO. If you're on Windows, you could use a tool such as Rufus. If you're on Linux, I recommend using just the GNOME disk utility tool and selecting restore the ISO right to it, and you're good to go. So let's go ahead and plug this in, and boot into our BIOS. And of course, depending on the motherboard you use, it's going to be a different key to go ahead and jump into the BIOS. So here we are in the BIOS of the system. I do plan on installing this on, and really the only thing you have to do here is first go to security. If this was a Windows machine, chances are secure boot was enabled. You're going to want to go ahead and disable that. And these Ugreen NASs have this weird thing they like to do where they have a watchdog. So you're going to want to disable that. What this does, if it's enabled, if it doesn't detect the hardware that it's shipped with, it will automatically, or the software, it'll automatically restart. Very annoying. So if you have a watchdog control, do make sure you disable that. And then the very last thing is to select our boot drive. And that is going to be this Proxmox USB right here, I think. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and save changes and reset. And it should boot us into the Proxmox installation. And there we go. We're going to want to continue with the graphical installation. Now this is a 4K capture card, so I might have to do some zooms here and there so you can see what's going on. And there it is. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I can barely see a damn thing. License agreement. You should probably read it, but I skimmed it once, so I'm going to just go ahead and hit I agree. So I'm going to tab over, agree to it. I'll have to use a mouse. I can't even see if I have the button selected. Here we have the installation disk, so do select the one that you actually plan on installing Proxmox on that you don't want to use for any other storage pools. If I go ahead and click on this, you can see I have a variety of options here because I do have the 3 NVMEs and 4 spinning disk drives. So this is the smallest one. I'm going to go ahead and select that. So with it selected, we go ahead and click on next. Now here is some pretty basic time zone country stuff. So change all this to what is appropriate for you. And once you do that, go ahead and click on next. Now here we have your administrator password. This is basically the root password for the Proxmox system. So do make sure it's fairly complicated, strong, and secure. The email is not as important unless if you actually want like notifications sent to it. Eventually I do want to set up a local mail server, so I'm just going to call this email at hopkey.net, but you could call it like email at proxmox.local. It could be anything that's valid. So from there, let's click on next. And here we have our host name. You can see the default is a kind of .local domain here. This is really going to be the only Proxmox system I have in my home network, so I'm going to just call it Proxmox. And you're going to want to have it end in a probably .local domain, at least for my use case. And then all the IP addresses, I just leave that as is. I let that be managed on the actual router side of my network. So let's click next. Gives us a nice little brief overview of everything we selected. So do make sure all that is accurate. We do have a checkbox there, automatically reboot when it's done. So let's click on install, and then boom, it'll begin that process. While it does this, kind of read through the little scroll text information. There's some good stuff in there. And there we go, the installation is complete. So now in just a second, it's going to automatically reboot. The IP address was there, but it will show up again once the system completely reboots. And no signal, I'm gonna pull out the USB drive. And here we are, this is what you're gonna see. You don't really need to log into this or do anything, but we are gonna want to connect to that IP address. It's the 249.8006. And here we are in Proxmox. So you can see I traveled to that IP address it told me to with the port ending in 8006. So from here, we can just go ahead and log in. This is going to be the exact same password that you created when setting it up, and save the username and log in. So boom, just like that, you have a little home server. You have a little Proxmox server. You're ready to go. This right here is my Proxmox node, and you could see if you go over to disks, all the disks that I have in the system. I have the 2 1TB NVMe drives and the 4 disk drives. Now, the first thing I am going to do is make some ZFS storage pools and then mirror these 2 NVMEs. And doing that is actually pretty simple. If we go over here to ZFS under the disks option, we could go ahead and create one. So if I select create, we have all of our drives here that are available. I'm going to select the 4 spinning disk drives that I have. This is going to be my main pool, and I'm going to go ahead and call this vault. We're going to uncheck add storage here. And then for the RAID level, I'm not going to go into full in-depth detail on what this is at the moment. I will leave links down below to everything that you need to know about this. For me, with this, I'm going to go RAID Z. That's very similar to kind of a RAID 5 configuration where 3 of these disks are going to have the accessible data, and one of them is going to be a parity drive. So that way I can afford to lose one single drive. If I wanted to be a little bit more secure, I could go RAID Z2, which is half and half, or I could mirror it. But for me, it's just movies, TV shows. I'm going to have another backup, so RAID Z is going to be completely fine. For compression, I'm going to go LZ4. I am not a professional in like RAID configurations and whatnot. I'm simply going with this because it is the one that I've read most recommended on Reddit. It does compress the files down a little bit, saving you some room, and there's not really any speed lost when it comes to transferring files. And do note right here that ZFS is not compatible with hardware RAID controllers, so note that. So everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. So there we go. We have created that first vault pool. Now I want to create another one real quick for the NVMe flash storage. This is going to be again for the container images as well as the virtual machine disks. So we are going to create this and call it flash. Let's uncheck that. This one is going to be mirrored. So if one fails, I could swap it out real easy. If both fail at the same time, I'm cooked. Compression LZ4, and then let's curate that. Shouldn't take any time at all, and it's done. So now we have flash and vault. Now one thing you may notice is this appears correct. 1.2 or 1.02 terabytes, it's mirrored, only one is showing, but this is showing all the available capacity for all 4 drives. And if you want to see the actual available storage here, I'm going to show you a couple commands. So I'm going to go over to the shell, and let's go ahead and type in, I think it's zpool list, hit enter, and that will show basically exactly what we see in Proxmox. We see the full 14.5 terabytes of all 4 disks. I'm pretty sure this is the command they're using within the graphical user interface to display that data. But if we go ahead and type in ZFS list, this will show us the actual available storage. So we have 10.4 terabytes in the vault pool and just above 900 gigabytes in the flash pool. So that is a really good resource to actually see the available disk space there. So now what I'm going to want to do real quick, we can't really use these within virtual machines and containers. We're going to want to add some additional directories to this that we can use and then assign them to certain functions within Proxmox. And to do that, we're going to go over here to Data Center. Within here, we have storage. We can see the 2 default. We have local and local LVM. And let's say in theory, which is not theory because I'm actually going to do it, I wanted to store backups on the Vault hard disk pool. All I would do is go over here to add. Let's go ahead and add a directory. This is going to be my backups. And we would want to put this in a directory within the pool that we want, which is going to be Vault, again, those spinning disk drives. And we're going to call the directory super creative backups. Here under content, this is the most important. Right now it's set to disk image. We're going to want to change this to dump backup file here as well as snippets. So now whenever I wanted to go and create an actual backup schedule, this would be an option, as well as local, because you could see it's assigned the same thing right here. But if I did want to change that so this local one didn't show up, I could simply go to edit, go to content, and then remove that dump backup file option. Click OK, and there we go. Now this local one is only responsible for ISO images, container templates, and so on. And you could even create a separate directory within a pool specifically for ISOs or container templates if you wanted to. I usually just delete them when I'm done using them, so that's not something I need to do. But what I do want to do is make my big data directory share that I'm going to add to a few different containers, using basically all of those 10 terabytes. So to do that, I'm going to create a new directory, and this one is going to be my data, and within this it's going to be under Vault. Again, it's those spinning disks and data. And for content, I'm going to set it to disk image as well as container, because I'm going to give access to virtual machines and containers to this directory. So that looks good. We could go ahead and add it. And now lastly, I have those 2 flash drives, the flash pool. So if I go add a directory, this I'm going to want to use as the main disk image location for virtual machines and containers. So I'm just going to call this disks, because that's going to be its primary purpose. And then the directory is going to be within flash and disks. So for content, disk image is perfect, as well as container again, just like our last one. So boom, we could go ahead and add that and to kind of show you where that is and how it's working. If I just go over to our Proxmox node again into the shell, if I cd into our root directory, you can see now we have flash and vault. And for example, if I were to cd into the vault and ls, we could see we have the backups and data folders in there. So now, finally, what we're going to want to do is create our very first container, and this container is going to be running Cockpit on Ubuntu specifically to create network shares so I can access various pools and make shares for my local network. And to do this, first we're going to go over here to local. This is where the container templates are currently stored, unless if you've changed to that. You can see I already have one downloaded, but if you want to download one, you just click templates here. For me, I went ahead and selected Ubuntu. It's my personal favorite. It's the one I'm most familiar with. But if you have a preference towards Arch, Fedora, something, even a Red Hat, something like that, you can find what you need in here. I went with 22.04 because it is the latest LTS that works with Unraid. Just download that. And then when you do have it downloaded, we're going to go ahead and click create container. So node Proxmox container ID 100 is perfect. Host name, this is kind of important because this is going to be what shows up on like auto discovery in Windows, for example, under the device name. For me, I'm just going to call this vault and keep these settings as is. For the password, make sure it is something complicated, strong, and secure. This is going to be your root password for this container. So from there, let's go next. Under local, we're going to select our Ubuntu template that we downloaded, go next, and for disks right here, we are going to do disks, which is the one that we created specifically for this, so this is going to be running on a NVMe SSD. I'm not going to use it for much, so 32 gigs is going to be fine for me. We're going to give it an extra core for a little bit more power, and we don't really need that much RAM, but I am going to double it up to a single gigabyte of memory and a gig of swap. Go next. For this, the bridge network is going to be completely fine, but I am going to go with DHCP, which will make it so my actual router, my Omada equipment is going to be in control of the IP addresses and all that. So go next. DNS, we're going to keep that as is, and you can run through this, make sure everything looks right, and then click finish. If you didn't notice, I didn't click the little option to start the container when it's all done because we want to go ahead and add that new data storage pool or storage directory within the pool. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to head over to our new vault right here, and then under resources, we're going to go ahead and click on add. We're going to add a new mount point. One of the beautiful things about containers in Proxmox is just adding mount points like this is really easy. We don't have to go in and play with like the fs tab file or do anything like that. Mount point 0 is fine. The storage, we're going to use data, which you can see the whole capacity here. This one's actually displaying a little bit better, but if I select that, disk size, this isn't the actual disk size, more or less the quota that you're allowing this specific container to access and use. So I'm going to go 10,000 or roughly 10 terabytes of data. And then the path, of course, is the path within the container. So when we log into that Ubuntu machine, and if we just go to /data, that is where we're going to find this pool. So I'm not going to include this in the backup job, and then hit create. So now you can see that new mount point right there. So what we can do now is actually fire up this new Ubuntu container, head over to the console, and here we can log in. So it's just root, and then that password we set up when we set up the container. And here we are. Real quick, just so you can see what I was talking about, if I ls in the root directory, you are going to see right here that data directory. So now it has access to that full 10 gigabyte storage pool. It's an Ubuntu system, so we're going to do app update and upgrade our machine, and then let this command run real fast. Awesome, there we go, we're completely updated. So now we are finally going to get the software that we're going to be using to create our actual network shares. And again, we are going to be using Cockpit here. I'll link to their website down below so you can learn more. It's a really nice graphical user interface, primarily for managing basically any Linux system out there. We're going to use this command right here. We're going to do install or no install recommends. So let's grab that. The reason we're doing that is because Proxmox manages basically everything from the host names, networking, a lot of things that we don't want to try to have Cockpit manage because then there can be some issues there. So let's go ahead and paste this command in. Apt install Cockpit, yes. Hit enter, and then boom, Cockpit's installed. So if I do an IPA command, I could see the specific IP of this machine. It is ending in 252. So let's open up a new tab here and travel to it. And I believe Cockpit is on the port 9090 here. Got a little security risk. It's our system, so we're just going to accept that and continue. And here we could just log in with our root user. So root, and then whatever your password is, log in, and there we go. We're in. There's really not a lot going on right now. We could see our services that are running. We have accounts here, various logs, and of course our overview of our system metrics and some really basic system information. And in order to manage our shares through Cockpit, there's going to be a couple things we're going to want to add. They're over here. We have the Cockpit file sharing. We have Cockpit Navigator, which is going to allow us to actually navigate our file system and our file trees through Cockpit. And then we have our Cockpit identities, which makes managing users and groups really easy. So I'll go ahead and have these linked down below. Basically, all you're going to want to do is go to this deb file right here. We're going to copy the link, head back over to Proxmox, and I'm simply going to wget to download it, paste in that link, hit enter, and then it's going to download that Debian package. And then just real quickly repeat the process with the other 3 deb files. So there is our last one downloaded, and now if I ls, we can see all 3 Debian files there. So now to install these, we're just going to run a apt install // for our current directory, and then we're going to do star for all of them and deb. Hit enter. We're going to want to proceed with that. Give it a minute, doesn't take too much time. And there we go, we got a permission denied just because it wasn't able to delete our deb files. So I'm pretty sure we could just do a remove star.deb to get rid of those. There we go, we're in the free and clear. So now if we jump back over to our Cockpit dashboard here, we don't see nothing, but if we refresh it, we now have some more stuff. We have our navigator, file sharing, and identities. So navigator here, you can see the file system. And if we go into data, for example, we will have that specific mount point that we added. If I head over to file sharing, we are going to get this little notice. It's misconfigured. I do recommend you click fix now. But first, let's go over to identities and create our groups and users. So I'm going to create a new group here, and we could sort the IDs so we can kind of see what's going on here. I'm going to end up using the users group quite a bit, but just so I can show you a custom group, if I go ahead and just click add here, group name, this can be something like data-share, so that's our data share group. Create that, and now the group was created. So now we're going to want to go ahead and create our users. So if I click identities again, it's going to take us back here. We're going to go over to users. We have our root user here, and we're going to click add user. And this is just like creating a user through like the Ubuntu add user command. My username is going to be Brandon. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a full name. Go ahead and give myself a home directory in there. We're going to go bash. And then right here under groups, the default is myself automatically, but I could go ahead and add a couple groups. If I only wanted this person to access the data share group, I could do that. But since I'm here, I'm going to also assign myself to the users group, wherever it is. There it is, users. And I do want this to be a sudo user. So I'm going to give myself sudo privileges right there. There it is. So I'm going to click apply. Here we're going to type in a password, make it pretty strong, complicated, and secure. As you can tell, I did not. Click apply. It's going to get a little mad at us, but if we click apply again, it's going to allow us to create it with that password. Here, SSH doesn't exist. I'm going to go ahead and fix that real fast, and we are good to go. And obviously, if you add more users, you can really customize the groups that they're in. You can not give them sudo or even user group privileges. You can do it however you want to do it. It's a home lab. Play around, learn, have fun. And real quick, this is kind of important. We're going to want to go down here to Samba, set our password. Here, I know it's kind of redundant. You should just be able to use the default password or your user password you already have set up, but we have to create it again there. You can make something different for extra security, but I'm just going to apply that. So now we're getting into file sharing. We want to actually share a folder, which is going to be that data folder, so everybody in my home network can have access to it. So the description of our server, this is our vault. Work group is going to be work group. I just kind of have it match Windows because I do have a couple Windows machines. I am going to optimize this for Mac OS, because I do also, there's a couple Mac OS machines in the house. So let's apply that. And let's create our share. Again, this is under Samba or Samba. We have NFS there if that's what you prefer. But let's go ahead and create a share here. So let's add this, and we have our share name. So this is going to be the data folder that is going to appear under the Vault device that appears on the network. And this is going to be mostly for media files. And the path of this is simply going to be within data, because that's the mount point I created. With on our actual host Proxmox system, this is vault and data, but this is what this sees, so that's what we're doing. So right here, I'm going to click on edit permissions, and I'm going to change the user or the owner of this to myself. So this user is the, I think I'm the 1000 ID for the user and the 100 ID for group. Group, I am going to give this to data share, and then you could customize some permissions. So if I wanted everybody in this group to be able to write to it, I would just check that, and you could change this to whatever your preference is. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And now here you have valid users and valid groups. So I'm going to ignore that for now, because if I check this right here, boop, it goes away. This right here is your main permissions. So cancel that out. And basically what this does, it just adds a couple variables that makes it work a little bit better with these systems. If you don't have Mac OS or you're not using Linux clients, then just checking this one for Windows ACLs is going to be fine. But I'm going to select this one. You can kind of see the difference here. If I go between these, it adds additional arguments here, but I want the full Linux macOS support. And again, I can add some more to optimize for macOS shares, because I do use Macs for video editing. And yeah, that seems to be everything that we need. So if I go ahead and click on confirm, we now have that share. Now, something that's important, if you're on or using Windows machines, this isn't going to be discoverable right away. So we're going to install an additional package called WSDD. If I head over to their GitHub page, WSDD. Here it is. This is a web discovery host daemon, basically allowing your device to be found by web service directory clients such as Windows. And to install that, we're just going to head back over to Proxmox, drop this in. So give that a paste, install it, and it's really easy as that. We could check to make sure that that's running with a systemctl status and WSDD. And we could see it's active. Now, if I go over here, let's go ahead and try to connect to this. So it's not automatically showing up here, which I kind of expected. Let's go SMB. It should automatically show up on Windows and even Mac OS. But let's go 10. This is going to be 52. And let's see if that works without adding the share real quick. Type in our password. Let's remember that forever. Connect all. So let's add the specific share. Connect. Password once again. And connect. There we go. We're now in there. So if I did something like this text document, let's save this to that new share. So data, and that's a fine name. Let's save it. We can see it pop up right there. And even if we go over here to our navigator and go under data, we will see the file right there. So now we have external access to our Proxmox home server. Beautiful. And now at this point, the video is getting pretty long. So in part 2, we are going to be doing the next step in this task of building up this server, and that is creating the ultimate media server. I will be setting up Plex. I'll show you how to set up Jellyfin, which I use kind of parallel as a kind of backup. Setting up all my R suites and Docker with downloaders, VPN, a bunch of beautiful, awesome, super cool stuff. And I'm just going to keep on recording, so that video will be out in a day or two if you're watching this right away. So do subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss that. Otherwise, it will be on my face right now or in the description down below. With all that, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful day, and goodbye.